Hello, I wanted to talk about the Emily Brontë novel Wuthering Heights. For those of you watching this on Minds, I might have to split this up into two because I'm sure it's going to be a long video. I might even split it up into two for the other platforms as well. We'll have to see how it goes. But let's start. Emily Brontë wrote only one novel, and yet it's one of the most famous in the English canon. There are many ghost stories. There are many stories of families ripped apart by internecine squabbling. There are many romances of thwarted love and jealousy. And yet Wuthering Heights is something different. It's not just another Gothic novel. The point about great literature, as opposed to just the good stuff, is that there's something about it that describes the human condition. At whatever period of time, it says something which we can actually relate to in our own experiences, whatever century we're living in. Generally speaking, this isn't something that's so apparent at the time. It's just that you get a story which somehow grabs you and won't let go, and you don't know why. So I'm going to try to analyse with you how Emily Bronte's observations about the souls of people are relevant to our condition today. I'm not trying to pretend that Brontë gives us any answers, but what I am going to point out is that there are some human characteristics and drives of which we should be aware, because when you're aware of something, it helps you to find your own answers. So, on with the show. First of all, I'm going to play you a clip of a video I made last year on a visit to some friends who live on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border. We're in Yorkshire at a place called Teilly Pike. And the Teilly Pike in question is, let's see if I can get this behind me. You see that there behind me? That was built originally as a beacon, part of a series of beacons built across Britain, which could be lit in the event of invasion during the Napoleonic Wars. It's very little understood that in the early 19th century or the late 18th century, people in Britain were genuinely afraid of Napoleon taking over and causing Britain to become, in effect, a French colony, which it is almost now with the EU, and I want it on record as saying I'm glad we're getting out of it. At least I hope we're getting out of it. Politicians seem to be shilly-shallying on that one. Anyway, I'll give you a view of the Yorkshire countryside, which is my countryside because I am a Yorkshire woman myself. So here's the countryside, and anyone who's read the book Wuthering Heights you can hear the gentle wuthering of the wind round here. So this is the area around Todmorden, and I'm just taking a quick walk before we carry on our journey back to London. I posted that video to my Patreon subscribers as a private video for them. I'm off Patreon now, and by the way, on Subscribestar, for any of you who may be wondering what's happened to the Patreon link. But this clip just gives you an idea of the environment in which Wuthering Heights was set. Wuthering Heights broke new ground in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre did the same thing, by the way, both. It was totally new in the novel form, but they approached that in different ways. all the sisters were highly innovative, but you have to realise that they were that way because they were isolated for much of their lives and didn't get pressure from outside society onto what they should or should not do or think. Their difficult circumstances and their poverty and remoteness from general society forced them into creating their own forms. And this was sometimes self-imposed as well. Emily Brontë had several chances to melt into sophisticated society. She went to learn and work at a school in Brussels, for instance, with her older sister, Catherine. But the educator there at the time noted she was very stubborn in her opinions and habits and refused to bend with the wind to anything. He had great respect for her intellect, and she certainly had a very powerful brain. She taught herself German from books while she was living in Yorkshire, stuck out there on cold nights in a house on the Yorkshire moors. And while in Brussels, I think she must have been in her 20s by that time, or at least pretty close to it. She started learning the piano and became so good at it, the school actually offered her a job as a music teacher. So the first lesson we can learn from the Brontes' writings is nothing to do with their genius and everything to do with the recognition that sometimes original thinking can come only from isolation and detachment and a stubborn contrariness that, in the Brontes' case, stopped them going with the flow. And to bring it up to date, I think we can talk about Tommy Robinson in such terms. There are things he does that I think are probably imprudent, and there are things he does that I think are downright aggressively foolish. But then I go with the flow more, and I am never going to shake up the British establishment. So, onto the story. It's a bit difficult to unpick the plot of Wuthering Heights because one of the main innovations is that it isn't told chronologically. And before some Muslim, because I get a lot of Muslim commentators on these threads, before some Muslim commentator tells me that the Quran did this non-chronological thing first, I want to point out that the Hebrew Bible did it first, and that was because of a convention which both of these books followed, in which, apart from the first 5 books of Moses, the books were arranged not chronologically but in order of length. That was the convention of the time. Now, it's entirely possible that Emily, being the daughter of a curate, would have known her Bible inside out and upside down and would have been intrigued by the lack of chronology, of the Bible, and this might have inspired her to do something similar. But in her case, the chronological chaos happens because the story is told by different people at different times. So each will have his or her own timeline, and then when the story is taken up by someone else, the timeline resets. But we can consider that the story is chaotic for a reason. Emily Bronte's life was marked by death. Her mother died, her sisters died, her brother died. She was assailed by a perpetual tide of death washing around her. Furthermore, she, as I keep saying, lived on the Yorkshire moors, a part of Britain constantly battered by the sort of furious and unpredictable weather which still kills the occasional unwary tourist who thinks it's a nice idea to go for a walk across those hills wearing a t-shirt, shorts and espadrilles. I suppose there wouldn't be so many deaths now than there used to be because of mobile phones. But when I was a teenager, some friends who were actually well dressed for the outing damn near ended their lives when caught in a blizzard on an afternoon's hike out near Ilkley, I think. So we have the atmosphere in Wuthering Heights of a background of chaos. And in this background of chaos, we have 2 comfortably rich families, the Lintons and the Earnshaws, who own substantial and solid properties on either side of a Yorkshire valley. One of them's Wuthering Heights and the other one is Thrushcross Grange. Both families are well educated, prosperous and self-satisfied in their confidence of the perpetuity of their birthright. They feel that nothing can disturb them. And I just want to point out that we have a similar situation in Western societies now. We feel we've established our house and that whatever we do, nothing will change that. And of course, we're wrong. The world was never going to change for the Lintons and the Earnshaws. Their houses were solid and respectable islands set squarely in a sea of elemental chaos which would never touch them, and that was their mistake. The chaos entered their lives when Mr. Earnshaw turns up one day after a trip to Liverpool with a 6-year-old urchin starving on the streets of Liverpool, upon whom he took pity, and who has dark hair and swarthy skin and is marked out as different from everyone else in that Yorkshire Valley. They all call him a gypsy. We don't know whether he is actually a gypsy or not, but his dark complexion is certainly a marker in the novel for a tenacious ability to become a focus for chaos, and as a character who has an almost supernatural ability to hold a grudge. In fact, it ends up as a supernatural ability in many ways. Now, there's no point in going through the contra dance of ever-changing relationships in this story. Who marries whom, who loves somebody else, who pushes somebody else to marry somebody else. It goes on, but it all revolves around Heathcliff. He's taken in by the Earnshaws and attains preferential status in the family. As he grows, Mr. Earnshaw shows a marked preference for Heathcliff over his own son, Hindley, who isn't a nice man. And he actually sends Hindley away to school to get him out of the house. So the fact is, Hindley isn't a pleasant person and he's consumed by jealousy of Heathcliff. On the other hand, although Heathcliff is very well treated by Mr. Earnshaw, he has no inheritance. Earnshaw doesn't think to do that. And as soon as Earnshaw Senior dies, Hindley is back and shoving Heathcliff around like a servant. Heathcliff has a passion for Catherine Earnshaw, the daughter of the family, but believing he has no place in the Earnshaw family, leaves and somehow, we're never quite sure how, makes a huge fortune, which he then uses to come back to Wuthering Heights and wreak havoc on his erstwhile family. And also on the Linton family across the valley, because the Linton family, Catherine, his beloved, marries into the Linton family while he's away. Now, Heathcliff could have simply come back and lived well, which, as they say, is the best revenge. He could have bought up the properties of the effete remnants of these self-satisfied and naive people and made himself a man of substance in that part of the valley. Instead, he chose to destroy them, and in so doing, he ends up destroying himself as well. He spends his latter years holding conversations with an imaginary and long dead Catherine, muttering constantly to the skies and plotting ever more revenge on the families he reckons have slighted him. He may have had good reason to start with, and he certainly had cause to feel aggrieved, but his grudge took him over. His religious zeal in his attempt to make himself the only survivor and the inheritor of both the Earnshaw and Linton estates, the replacement man, the superior man, if you like, results not only in the destruction of his environment and the two houses, but also in his own disintegration. In the story of Wuthering Heights, out of this chaos finally emerges some sort of synthesis, with the proposed marriage of Catherine Earnshaw's daughter, also called Catherine, and Hareton, who is the son of Hindley and his wife Frances. Heathcliff's only child, himself, died childless. So for all Heathcliff's machinations, the Lintons and Earnshaws ended up joining together, and Heathcliff's line, polluted as it was with vengeance, passion and bitterness, is ultimately sterile, a dead end. That was Emily Bronte's take on this aspect of human nature. As I said when I was discussing Joseph Conrad's novel, The Nigger of the Narcissus, these great writers were not prophets. They couldn't see into the future, but what they could do better than anyone else was see how human nature develops in a certain environment and then project it along. And I believe that Wuthering Heights is a keeper because it does just that. And I think if we look at some of our own social situation now, we can see a lot of parallels with the story of Wuthering Heights. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and if you wish to donate, click the subscribe star link where you can make a one-off payment or set up a regular contribution, or I have a PayPal account at grannyopteryx@gmail.com. Till next time.